Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's Biznology Digital Marketing Webinar. My name is Frank Reed, and I'm one of the bloggers here at Biznology. I'm also the managing editor for Marketing Pilgrim blog, which is currently number 12 on the Ad Age Power 150. And I also consult with businesses regarding their internet marketing through my company, Local Basics. But today, you'll be hearing from Mike Moran, and Mike is the founder of the Biznology blog, and he will present Organizational Social Media for Financial Services, How to Start from Within. But before we do, we want to recognize and thank our sponsors. First is Source Media, publisher of American Banker Magazine, and Bank Technology News, serving the banking and financial services community. Our second sponsor is Abraham Harrison, LLC, the true expert in online public relations. And lastly is Marketing Pilgrim, the internet and social media marketing news blog. And we cut through the bull so you don't have to. So as we wait for more attendees to join us, let me just review the format of our webinar. Our Biznology webinars last just 30 minutes, so you can easily fit them into your busy schedule. We record each webinar, and we'll email you that link later this week. During our speaker's presentation, you can use your GoToWebinar controls to ask a question, and we encourage you to do that. That orange arrow opens and closes your webinar controls. If you have a question, simply type it into the box labeled questions at any time during the event and press the send button. And I will be able to select a few questions at the end of the webinar and pose them to Mike. So while we're waiting for our last few attendees to join us, I'd like to remind you that Biznology newsletter and blog are available for free at biznology.com. That's biznology.com. So if you're not already a subscriber, we hope that you'll sign up now. So thanks again to all of you for spending the next 30 minutes with us. We know how valuable your time is, so let's introduce today's speaker. Mike Moran is the founder of the Biznology blog, a well-known expert in all things digital marketing, and the chief strategist at Conversion, a leading social consultancy. Mike is a co-author of Search Engine Marketing, Inc., and the sole author of Do It Wrong Quickly. Mike is a veteran of IBM, managing groups in IBM.com for 8 years, and before retiring from IBM in 2008 as a distinguished engineer. So if you've ever struggled with how to get the most of social media within your organization, this is the webinar for you. So Mike, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Frank. So in some ways, financial services is like every other industry. Social media is a growing force, and both medium and large financial services businesses don't always know how to approach social media amidst all the other things that they need to do. And everybody is trying to figure out how you measure the value. Where's the return on investment? What are the kinds of things that you need to be doing both to protect yourself and to really benefit you and to differentiate yourself from your competitors? So every industry has these kinds of questions. And so in that way, financial services is like every other business. And we'll start by talking about these general issues that not only affect financial services, but other industries too. Before we're done, we're going to drill down on very specific things that financial services have to cope with that other industries don't. So one of the things that is very difficult across industries is that people always think of marketing first when they think about social media. So it's natural for us to think about social media as a place where you can reach out, you can listen to your customers, you can approach them, you can try out a new marketing message with them. All of those things are true. But it's also true that social media is a more general communications tool. It's like a telephone in that way. Just because you have a group in your company that staffs the call center, that doesn't mean that they're the only people that are allowed to use phones. And it doesn't mean that taking calls from clients is the only purpose for a telephone within your business. And so we need to think about social media in a much broader way than just marketing, even though marketing might be its most important function, at least for now. So we have to think about our communications people. We have to think about market researchers. We have to think about customers that are complaining and they have a problem that we need to help them with. We want to focus on bringing our customers together in community so that not only can we help them, but they can help each other. We also might want to think about product development. So what kinds of new banking services might people want? What kind of different configuration of existing services might they want? All of those things can be critical areas for us to use social media, and we don't want to overlook them just because marketing is the thing that we spend most of our time thinking about. As time goes on, it becomes clear that social media is at some point going to become its own business function. It's going to be a similar vertical function in marketing, just like phones are a vertical function for a call center, but it's also becoming a horizontal function, like payroll or human resources or information technology. And so if you look at how social media is rolling out, one of the things that's happening is that there are stages in which a firm goes through social media, and over time more and more business value is created. So at the beginning, there's some experiments where some people in a very small area are trying to use some free tools, and they're not really tasked to do this by the organization, but soon that evolves into an exploration where there might be a whole function like marketing that is now starting to use social media. But mainly they might be using it for listening. Then they might not necessarily be engaging with the audience because that might be something that's a little bit risky and scary, and they're not sure if they have permission. The third stage is when they really take that step and they start to reach out to customers, they start to respond to customers who might be complaining, they start to really be active within social media, and they start to do it on a corporate-wide basis. And the last step is the one I was describing at the top, where it really becomes its own business function, where there is a social media element to all of the different things that make sense within a business. Just as we talked about today, you wouldn't think twice of people being able to use a phone, and they can use the phone to call people within your company, they can call clients, they can call anybody. And we expect that everybody knows how to use the phone, and they know what kinds of things they should say with different audiences and what kinds of things they shouldn't. And social media is a communications tool just like the phone that will have that same kind of integration within your business. So what are the steps that you have to take to get there? So the first step that most companies take is listening. So they start thinking about what are the conversations out there? What's the tenor of those conversations? What's the sentiment? Are people complaining about certain issues? Are they providing kudos to the company in other areas? How do they see the competition? What are the problems that seem to pervade the whole industry? All of those kinds of things are things you only get by listening. A lot of people jump right to engaging at that point. As soon as they see a conversation, they'll run in and start talking about it. But for financial services and for a lot of businesses, it makes a little more sense to do some planning first, to understand how your organization is going to respond to social media. What are the key things that it needs to focus on? And also to understand how it's going to measure all of those responses. So with every plan for social media, just like with any other part of your business, you need to understand what your goals are, and you need to understand how you're going to measure that you're successful, or how you're going to notice you're not successful and then change. And so listening, planning, engaging, and measuring are the things that most companies do to succeed in social media. They also make sense for a lot of other parts of your business too. So let's look at listening for a moment. So this tells you what's really going on. And so it makes sense that you would not want to engage in social media. You wouldn't want to be out there putting your own messages out before you knew who the people were that are out there and what they think. And until you figured that out, then it doesn't make sense for you to try and figure out what you want to say in response. It's like walking into a cocktail party and just talking. I mean, if you haven't figured out what people are talking about, you're just barging in and changing the subject. And you're making it all about yourself instead of about the conversation. And so that's what listening really helps you do. And so there are a lot of ways to do listening. You can try and use it for markets research, like the chart we have here, where this bank was trying to figure out what the difference is in conversation depending on where they are in the purchase funnel. So are they just deciding that they need to change banks? Are they searching for information about that? Are they looking at competitors? Those are all pre-decision behaviors. Or is a lot of the conversation about purchase decision? And it turned out that a lot of the conversation was about post-purchase behavior. So what is it that people are talking about their current bank? And that was something that is different for each bank. There are some banks that have large market share for which this is the typical pattern. There are other banks that are right now aggressively going after market share where more of the conversation might be tilted to the pre-decision behavior. And these are the kinds of things you can find out by looking at what the conversations are in social media. And obviously you can find out lots of other things too. So in order to do listening, there are plenty of free tools out there that do that, but for medium to large companies, it might make sense for you to invest in a listening solution. And Frank mentioned I'm the chief strategist at Conversion, so obviously that's my favorite company on this page. But you can see from the Forrester Wave graph that's on this page that there are actually 3 companies that Forrester has made the leaders in this space. Conversion's one of them, but also Nielsen Buzzmetrics and Radian6, who's since been bought by Salesforce.com. They are all leaders that Forrester recognized when they did this wave, the most recent one back in 2010. Now, one of the things to think about when you're thinking about listening, as you start to think about how you're planning your use of social media, is you want to use the same information organization-wide. If you're using different listening tools in every different area, there's going to be all sorts of disagreement as to what the conversation is about because each tool is finding different things. It's like having different web analytics systems in each part of your site. It doesn't really work because you spend all your time arguing about the numbers. So you want everybody to use the same tool so that you don't have to have that kind of disagreement. You also want a tool that can distribute the information to where it needs to go. It could be that the same tweet is something that needs to be seen by the market research people, by the PR people, and by the product development people. And so you want to make sure you can route the information to the departments that need it. You also want to use it for engagement. A lot of times, companies are nervous about having anybody being allowed to engage with clients. It's something that they get nervous about for good reason because people may not know what they're allowed to say, what they're not allowed to say. And so a lot of these tools allow you to route things through a different approval process. And some people might have a different approval process than other people because maybe they've been trained more or maybe they've been told that they're allowed to respond without an approval. And so all sorts of configurations can be set up so that your business is able to control things the way you want it. So if you want everything to go through the compliance department before somebody answers, you can do that. If you want managers to have to respond to drafts that employees make before they post, that can be done too. Any of these things can be done by most of these tools. Measurement is one of the critical parts, though. For each thing that you're trying to do, you need to know what you're measuring. So for each tactic, you have to know what part of the cycle that you're in. You need to know what you're trying to drive with that tactic. You want to think about what the exact metric is that's your key performance indicator, and then look at what the other metrics are underneath that give you some kind of diagnostic about that big metric. And so if you walk through any of these things, whether you're trying to get people to be aware of what your offering is, you're trying to actually get them to purchase, you're trying to get them to advocate for purchases they've made previously because they're loyal to your company. For all of these areas, there are performance indicators that let you drive what metrics you need. And so you can look and see how those metrics are changing to know what the effect is. And so for some of these things, you can show true return on investment. For other things, it's just something that's directional. It points you to know that your decision is probably right. But for any of them, by looking at these measurements and then changing what you're doing in response, that's what helps you to understand how to continuously improve. So how do you coordinate all of these things across a large organization? So one of the things you need to do is to evangelize. You need to tell people what are the things that they need to do and not do, and why social media is important. So for a lot of companies, people don't do social media because they don't think it's part of their job. So one of the first things you need to do is to help them understand that it is. You need to provide them with the information and the training so they know what they're supposed to do. How do they use these tools? Which ones are strategic for us? What are the kinds of audiences that we're reaching? And what are the things we've learned from the listening we've done so that these people, when they walk in, they're not wading into a conversation that they don't understand. And obviously you need policies, especially when you're in a regulated industry, but any business needs to have policies about what things are allowed and not allowed. For some companies, this can be as simple as saying, all of the business rules that we have for you operating in other venues apply to social media, but it's often true that you need more. It's often true that there are things that you can do in social media that really aren't addressed in other forms of behavior policies, and so you need to make sure people know what those things are. If you don't have a social media policy, you can steal one. Steal from the best. Chris Boudreau, who's a colleague of mine at Conversion, has a website that lists 176 social media policies for companies in all industries. You can go there, look them over, see what makes sense for you. This way you know you're not forgetting anything, and you can really look at what different companies tell their employees, and it can help you know what you want to tell yours. But I promised you that we were not just going to look at some generic thing that every business has to look at. So even though everything we just talked about applies to financial services, there are a bunch of things that are unique about financial services that we really need to focus on. And so there's three main things I want to talk about in financial services. One is that everyone's a critic, that financial service management is maybe a little more conservative than in some other industries, and because it's a regulated business, the compliance rules are something that everyone's nervous about when they first get involved in social media. So let's look at why everyone's a critic. For some reason, financial services businesses are criticized in social media a lot more than other industries. And maybe this is no surprise to people in financial services, because people have this expectation that everything that a bank does should be done flawlessly, that they should have no fees for anything. And so people may have expectations that are oversized and no bank can really meet them. But the truth is that if you look at the negative perceptions of a bank, they are far, far lower, those perceptions. So over 40% negative, whereas most businesses are somewhere in the teens or 20s. And on the other hand, the positives are also lower. So the positives are in the mid-20s, where many businesses reach over 50%. And so this is a lot of market research that's been done over the last 3 years by Conversion, where they have many, many different clients that they've done this work for across all of these different industries, and financial services seems to somehow rank lower. And so one of the things that would make anybody gun-shy, including financial services management, is that social media seems like a hostile place. I mean, if all these people are criticizing you and very few people are saying something nice about you, who wants to go to that party? Who wants to be in that conversation? It's a little scary. It's a little painful. So, and you can see this research that IBM did, that many companies are not using social media. So a lot of banks are using it, but a lot are not. And so, and many have no budget for social. And so so this is a little bit different from a lot of other industries where typically there are much higher adoption rates for social media and more budget. The other thing that is really the elephant in the living room is compliance. And so last year in the U.S., Regulatory Notice 1006 was very, very clear about what needs to be done with social media. So those conversations have to be reviewed and archived, and they cited several SEC and NASD regulations that say so. And what that means for social media is you need a system that captures all of those interactions and stores them. And so there are a couple of companies out there that do just that. So Arcovy and Smarsh are two of them, where they will archive all of the things that you need, and that will help you comply with those regulations. In addition, you have to focus on what public and private data mean. So public data, like most of Twitter, blogs, YouTube, most message boards, under the FINRA regulations, they're considered advertising or public appearances. And so all of the rules that apply to public appearances in FINRA apply to this public data. Private data, on the other hand, like Facebook, most of LinkedIn, they're all considered sales literature. And so whatever applies to sales literature applies to this private social media data. And so a lot of financial services companies are looking at tools like Oceanus from IBM, Socialware, Context Optional, and there are many others out there. These are some of the leaders that monitor the kind of behavior that employees are operating through social media. Some of these pieces of software can actually block certain social venues or features of social venues. They can flag issues for review. They can make sure that managers have to approve different kinds of engagement. And they can make sure that users are authorized and that you have a social media policy that's defined and that you know how to execute. And so all of those things can be put into software. You cannot put any software in place that will stop people from doing every stupid thing they can do. But you can have training wheels. You can have things that will prevent maybe the biggest disasters, or at least some of them, based on what the features are and what the content are of the interactions that people have. So we're right at the beginning of this market. So it isn't true that all of these different pieces of software have the same features. They have different features. They approach things different ways. It's a very new market, so it's probably the best thing to do is to get demonstrations from these vendors, to actually do pilot tests and see how those things work. And I spent a lot of time just now talking about the compliance rules in the U.S., but if you're a global company, you need to follow the rules in each market that you're in, which are usually different. I mean, this was a very clever thing I saw. Here's the Twitter account for a British financial services firm, and they've got a Twitter disclaimer on their page. And so they've put together a custom skin for their Twitter ID in which they've got the disclaimer in there, because you might ask yourself, well, how do I get a disclaimer in 140 characters? And the answer is you can't. And so how do you do this? This is one example. Now, is this the right answer for everybody? I don't know, but what I'm saying is that you're going to have to focus on these questions, and you're going to have to figure out some clever ways around it. Now, I hope that this was helpful for you, and Frank, I'm ready to turn it back to you. I think maybe you might still be on mute, Frank.
Okay, there we go. All right, thanks, Mike. I'm sure attendees have a much stronger idea now of how to take advantage of social media within their financial services organization, but as it happens all the time, you didn't answer every question. We've got several good ones from our audience teed up for you. I'd like to remind our audience that it's not too late to ask your own question. You just type it into that questions box in your GoToWebinar controls. Before we get to that first question, I'd just like to once again thank our sponsors. Source Media, who is the publisher of American Banker Magazine, and Bank Technology News, serving the banking and financial services community. Abraham Harrison, LLC, the true experts in online public relations. And finally, Marketing Pilgrim, the Internet and Social Media Marketing News Blog. And just remember that we cut through the bull so you don't have to. Now, on to your questions. And the first question that we have, Mike, is about, it's about personnel. We didn't really get a chance to get into that, but do you have a certain type of person or a certain level of experience that you should be looking for? Is this something that you give to somebody who's just out of college and who knows social media, or is this a function that needs to be put in the hands of somebody who has business acumen and experience as well?
I think that a lot of it depends on what kinds of issues you're running into. For the most part, with most industries, and I would even include financial services and other regulated industries, people who know how to use the tool, and often, as you point out, they're painfully young to somebody like me, they can do just fine as long as you have prepped them for what the rules are and how the marketing messages are. On the other hand, if you're running into some very serious issues, if you're in crisis management, if some very bad story has just erupted over you, you might definitely need somebody with more experience. And so often in a large enough organization, you can have both of these people working together. So each one can be helping the other. So you might need to only pick one in the beginning, but very soon I think it makes sense for you to have both kinds of people involved in teaching each other.
Okay, great. We have another question from one of our folks, Jen. She asked, does that regulatory notice apply to every industry, or is that just something specific to the financial services industry?
The one that we walk through are the FINRA regulations in the U.S., and they only apply to the financial services industry. But there are other industries that have other kinds of regulations that apply to them. So pharmaceuticals is heavily regulated. There are many other regulations too. And in fact, there are regulations that the FCC has come out with that really apply to everybody in social media, where they've talked about making sure that you do full disclosure. So for example, when I did this webinar, here's an example. I work for Conversion, and I was talking about Conversion, and so I mentioned to everybody that I was talking about it. That's something that is required in social media for any company. So there are regulations that apply to all businesses, but the ones we talked about today are specifically for financial services.
Okay, great. And then we have another question, which is a great one, and very timely, considering how social media has shifted a little bit in the last few months. Is there an opinion, or you have an opinion, about leveraging Google Plus in this whole thing?
I'm really torn about Google Plus. In fact, if you've looked at the Biznology blog the last few days, you've seen Frank post about Google Plus, you've seen me post about it, and you've seen another of our contributors, Chris Abraham, post about it today. And Frank's opinion is that Google Plus for most businesses isn't even as important as Google Places. And my opinion is that Google Plus is still something that not enough people are using, that it makes a lot of sense to throw a lot of resources in it. Although if you're an early adopter, that may give you some kind of advantage, just like it does to have a very old website with old links to it. It makes you more trustworthy. But Chris Abraham this morning in the Biznology blog talked about exactly how you can take advantage of Google Plus, why it's important, and why it's especially important for businesses. Now the Google Plus has come out with its Google Plus for Business pages. And so I think that the jury's really out on Google Plus. One of my problems is that there are so many different social networks that you have to take advantage of that I haven't allocated the time for all of these. And one of the things I do personally is I have my own Twitter account, but I also mirror my tweets to Facebook and to LinkedIn. And it's not really that easy to mirror them to Google+. And so I haven't done that yet. But so I'm not spending a lot of time on Facebook. I'm not spending a lot of time on LinkedIn. I'm spending all my time on Twitter. And I haven't done much on Google+ at all. If that's the right decision, I don't know. But I know that since Google+ for Business has only been out a couple of days, very few businesses are in it yet. And the adopters among consumers so far are mostly high-tech people, and it's a fairly small percentage compared to Facebook. So even though it's the fastest growing social network ever, that doesn't tell you that much because I think there's only about 40 million people on it, and which is dwarfed by the number of people on the older social networks. So I think you might have to really stare this down and make a decision based on what you think the value would be. Right now, I'd say it's hard to make a case for you working on this as opposed to working on other kinds of social media.
And want to be respectful of people's time, but there's one other question I'd like to get to. Is there any other thing outside of what would be considered the standards? You know, you've got Facebook and Twitter, and Google Plus trying to make its way in there, or even LinkedIn. Is there any other ways to create something that's a little bit more controlled? Something, or have you seen any companies that have tried to create, in a way, their own social network so they can tend to people's needs and not necessarily be in the mainstream?
Yes, there are plenty of community platforms. So Communispace is probably the most popular one, where you're creating a closed social network. And a lot of times companies do this for market research purposes, where they would like to invite people to give them feedback on things, but they don't want all of their ideas to be things that their competitors see. And so they offer some kinds of incentives for people to participate in these private communities, and they operate that way. Perhaps it's possible to create a private network where clients of a bank are able to discuss things that in a way that's perhaps a little more private than other ways. But I would think with all the regulations about privacy that I'm not sure that having a private network would really command that many advantages. So I don't know of any financial services firms that have created one of these private communities, but I don't think that it really gives you a lot of control over your marketing message. I really think that the days of message control are over, and what we really had back then was media control, not message control. And so we need to really focus on where we are now, which is you don't control your image anymore. Your image is controlled by the conversation that's going on around you, and you have influence over it about as to how you engage with that conversation. And so rather than looking for controlled situations, I think we're going to have to make our peace with those out-of-control situations and figure out how we can influence them, even if we can't control them.
Okay, and we've got one last one I'd like to throw at you, Mike. This from one of our attendees, Jessica. What are your recommendations for programs or software that measures ROI for social media and financial services?
I think that right now we're not at the point that there are any packages out there. I think I know in my work with Conversion, we do a lot of consulting engagements around return on investment, and for each individual company, we eventually come up with an amalgam of tools that together will answer that question of return on investment. But I don't think there's any kind of turnkey social media ROI package out there yet. So I think it becomes a combination of all sorts of different tools. So it's a combination of tracking codes that are planted on the social media content themselves, web analytics program like Google Analytics or Omniture, whatever one you're using, and then some kind of handoff to offline. So it might be a handoff to a CRM system. It might be something as simple as coupons that people can print and bring into whatever the local branch is and redeem them for something. And so somehow you need to kind of connect the dots between what they did online and what they do offline. And it's different for every kind of business and every kind of industry. So a lot of the times I'd say that's still a consulting engagement. And I'd be happy to do that consulting engagement for you. But the truth is that I don't think there's some kind of off-the-shelf software. You could cobble together those kinds of things yourself, and many do. But I think if you're really looking for a turnkey solution, you're going to need to hire a consultant to put it together for you, at least right now.
All right, great. Well, want to be respectful of everybody's time. It's one of the things we try and do each month with our webinars is we know you're very busy, so that's all the time that we have for today. Thanks to Mike for these great ideas, and thanks especially to our audience for your participation and your questions. That's always what makes the difference. If any of you had questions that you did not have time to answer, you can email your question to Eileen, it's E-I-L-E-E-N, at MikeMoranGroup.com, and she'll be sure to get them to Mike for the answer. Later this week, we'll send you all a link to the recording of the webinar to listen to again and to share with others. And we also invite you to mark your calendars for our next Biznology webinar, which will be Global Social Media Marketing, and that's scheduled for 11 a.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. on January 10th. So we won't be seeing anybody till after the holidays, so we hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, a Merry Christmas, and whatever else that you do. And thank you very much for your time today.